Daughter of War by S.J.A. Turney. Read by Jonathan McGarrity. Preface. The Templars have gone far beyond a historical group of Catholic warriors founded to protect pilgrims in the Holy Land. They have become part of legend, and, like all legends, the truth is often nebulous or distorted. Despite their importance, they were only around for 200 years. To put that into perspective, the Plantagenet family provided monarchs for a century longer. In the sweep of history, it is little more than the blink of an eye, yet they have made their mark on the human consciousness. Over the years, this strange and impressive organisation has been the subject of endless treatises, novels, films and more. They appear sometimes as heroes, occasionally as villains. Sometimes they are shown as rigid soldiers of God, monks with swords protecting the pious from the heretic. Sometimes their trials and the many accusations made against them by wealth and power-hungry crowns are brought to the fore, and they themselves are depicted as heretics, occultists and more. I have attempted in this book to avoid such temptations, to make the Templars neither exemplars of rigid piety nor secretive heresy. I have attempted to produce a tale based on a realistic appraisal of the order, true medieval characters rather than heroes or villains. With this in mind, I will state from the outset that the very existence of female Templars, though not well documented and perhaps not officially sanctioned, is very real. The two female characters I have used are historically attested people, for all the seeming flight of fantasy that such women might have existed. Cartularies have survived that document admissions and transactions within the Templar order, and it is from these documents that the characters have come. The Templars were much more varied and complex than simply knights with white cloaks and red crosses. Welcome to the order of the Poor Knights of Christ and the Temple of Solomon. Welcome to Spain. Part 1. Loss. Chapter 1. Ebro Basin, Kingdom of Aragon. Year of our Lord 1198. Summer. Arnau of Vallbona spied the enemy at the same time as the rest of the company of Santa Coloma. A roar of righteous ferocity rising from every throat, audible even above the deafening thunder of hooves. The mailcoats of the waiting Moors gleamed in the searing Iberian sun with a brilliance that Christian chain shirts never seemed to achieve. A shimmering piscine argent that rippled beautifully. Their lines were an explosion of colour, their banners fascinating. An illegible scroll of Arabic script beneath images of swords and crowns and crescents and stars. Their helms, combined with chain coifs, revealed so little of their swarthy faces they might easily have been Christians, but for their banners and the quality of their mail. White, hungry eyes shone out from the darkness flanking their helmets' nose guards as they levelled their maces, hammers, swords, lances, a challenge, a threat. The arid, umber-coloured ground rumbled away beneath Arnau and his companions, as the small mounted force of knights and men-at-arms bore down on the Moorish raiders who had plagued the region this past year and more. The border with the Almohads, who controlled Valencia, had created a fluid and dangerous region, ever mobile and changing, and raiders were far from uncommon. But this particular force had drawn Aragon's ire upon the brutal burning of a church in the spring. Pedro II, King of Aragon and Count of Barcelona by the grace of God, had commanded 3 of his more belligerent nobles to gather a force with which to bring the raiders to justice. 3 companies had rolled south to seek the enemy, that of Pero Fernández de Zagra, Lord of Albarracin, of Don Atorea, and of Arnau's own lord, the aged warrior beloved of Christ, Berenguer Cervelo de Santa Coloma. The ego of the Lord of Albarracin had led him to assume he would achieve overall command of the force, and his pride had been somewhat dented when the king brushed the arrogant noble aside and sent someone entirely different to lead the campaign. A glorious figure who now rode at the head of the cavalry and had drawn Arnau's eye throughout the ride, inspiring him and quelling his doubts and fears. The army had chased around the dry, brown borderlands for 2 weeks, often catching wind that the raiders had been seen in the area recently or were tantalizingly near. Twice they had even caught up with the enemy, only to lose them again as they deployed the mass ranks of foot soldiers. The raiders were an entirely mounted force, far too quick and manoeuvrable to trap into a full fight with infantry, and on each occasion they melted away into the hills and valleys, whooping before the Christian force could be brought fully to bear against them. Consequently, this time, when the enemy had been spotted, the bulk of the infantry had been left with the wagons, and the horses issued forth to join battle or chase the raiders into the swift waters of the Ebro to drown. Albarracin had been scathing, displeased with the peril of matching only cavalry against cavalry, which would cancel out all the advantage in numbers the Christians could claim, though the army's leader had simply straightened and proclaimed his faith in God and their sureness of victory. The enemy was not a force of organised, devout Almohad warriors. The Almohads, who had crossed the straits from Africa and imposed a powerful caliphate upon the previously fragmented Moorish Taifa states of Iberia, were truly a force to be reckoned with. Zealous and clever, they had all but halted the Christian reconquest for half a century now. Yet it was not they who awaited the cavalry, but a rabble of vicious Moorish raiders who had taken advantage of the rough borderlands. Arnau had tried throughout the ride to hate the men they would face, and had found that he could only do so if he focused on that aspect. Not that they worshipped a heresy, but that they were raiders who killed and thieved as a matter of course. That they had burned a church with a priest still inside. That made them bad men. Arnau was as God-fearing a young man as could be found in the county of Barcelona, and he kissed the feet of the Virgin statue in the village chapel every day. He had sat vigil in that same sanctuary. He took the Eucharist and believed with an undying passion in the divinity of the Trinity. But he had been born in the days when the Moors' dominance of the region was still fresh in the minds of all, when the after-effects of 4 centuries of Moorish control were still being unpicked from society, largely unsuccessfully. The streets still often carried their Moorish names. The land was irrigated with their ingenious systems. The arches to be seen in grand buildings were still distinctly theirs. Even their delicate bathhouses still functioned, though few God-fearing Christians would trust their flesh to such a place, with their cloying steam and rough masseurs. But that great fall of a culture in the region, as the Moor had been driven back south, had created a strange rift between Christians young and old. Those who had spent their lives under the dominion of the Moor, which had been lifted less than half a century ago, were often still fervent and spiteful in their denunciations. To them, the Moors were the soldiers of the Antichrist, walking the earth, who had imposed their twisted beliefs upon the true people of Iberia. Men like Arnau's father, in fact, seeking a final end to the Musulman and his ways. Men like the French and English lords who sought repeatedly to take sharpened steel to the Holy Land and wrest Jerusalem from the clutches of the Saracen. Those younger men like Arnau, though, who had been raised among the ashes of that world, lived a more complicated life. They watched the Moors who had remained living as little more than slaves in the new regime, being beaten for failing to adequately farm land that their families had cultivated as free people for hundreds of years. It was hard to hate them, so much easier to pity them. After all, as the 5th book of Matthew preached, "You have heard it said, an eye for eye, and a tooth for a tooth. But I tell you not to resist an evil person. If anyone slaps you on the right cheek, turn to them the other cheek also." Arnau hardened his heart. Blessed Matthew could afford clemency. He had not been burned in a church by such men. Forget the Moorish boys begging for a crust on street corners, a cross carved in their forehead with their own thumbnail to deny their origin and encourage passing Christians to help them. Forget the grave of the gentle imam in Vallbona that was still spat upon daily, despite his having been a kindly old man who had helped Arnau's own grandfather to ease his pain in his last years. Forget that Aragon and Catalonia had been their homes for more generations than any man could remember. These men were raiders and priest burners beyond pity.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?